Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm discussing Dexter's Laboratory, created by Genndy Tartakovsky. I always want to call it Dexter's Laboratory because, the way Dexter speaks. And what's funny is that when I went back to rewatch a bunch of episodes of this show, I just more so remember, like, with this show specifically, and honestly, like, with Cartoon Network shows specifically, with the ones we grew up with in the late 90s. I'm talking this series, Powerpuff Girls, Ed, Edd n Eddy, Courage the Cowardly Dog. I more so remember watching those shows with my siblings. And we used to watch Nickelodeon together too, but just for some reason, like, these specific cartoons from that late 90s, early 2000s era, I just remember watching with my brother and sister and quoting them a lot with them, and also like us laughing, like genuinely laughing our asses off at these shows. And with this one too, like what I've noticed for me personally, like because growing up with Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network specifically, that Nicktoons to me were more so always kind of more character driven, more grounded storytelling for the most part. Like when I think of Nickelodeon, I think of Rugrats, Hey Arnold's, things that are more grounded. But then of course you have like the wacky shows too, like Rocko's Modern Life, Angry Beavers, like all these other crazy cartoons that we grew up with watching. And then with these shows on Cartoon Network specifically, I think of them more as slapstick, more action, more comedy driven, and more so cartoony in the sense that you can see the influence of Hanna-Barbera, and they just feel more cartoony in the sense that even like they're fast paced, like with this show specifically, how there are more so the 7 minute segments rather than the two 11-minute segments that really started with Nickelodeon thanks to Vanessa Coffey. And so obviously like with Nickelodeon too had the wacky shows like Ren and Stimpy too, which one of the first original three Nicktoons, but then also there was Doug, another slice of life cartoon. So just for me though, thinking of the two networks like at the time with these shows, that just Cartoon Network being more comedy and action, and Nickelodeon being more character driven and more grounded storytelling, in my opinion, just like of differentiating the two, even though of course there are exceptions. And obviously with Genndy Tartakovsky, he's gone on to create some truly like really amazing animated shows, including Samurai Jack, and then also Primal, which I know is an Emmy Award winning series. And each show of his is so distinct from one another, and he's really a master of silence in his shows. I know with Primal there's little to no dialogue. I've been meaning to check out that show. I'm sure it is really amazing. I've been meaning to also check out Samurai Jack too, because I know I like vaguely remember it when it was on TV originally, and then I never really watched it though. And then I know of course it had like a reboot of sorts a few years ago where it was just like a continuation, and it was more geared towards an older audience, for people who grew up with the series, to really tell the complete ending that he wanted to tell. And to my understanding, that people kind of didn't necessarily love the ending, or maybe it was bittersweet. Like I've read about it and everything, so that's a show I'm gonna have to eventually check out. I know, I'm sure it's amazing, because obviously Genndy Tartakovsky is a phenomenal artist, animator, storyteller. And of course, he, along with a lot of people from Cartoon Network during this era, of course, Craig McCracken too, people that like got started early on these early shows that went on to create such other amazing shows on Cartoon Network. And then of course also Rob Renzetti, who is the creator of My Life as a Teenage Robot, who worked on this series too. So a lot of these really talented cartoonists, like these really talented artists. And what's funny with this show is that it really is so fast paced, like especially with the 7 minute segments, just it just goes by really fast, and it's just a really, to me, like a very goofy, over the top show, and just kind of like not really trying to teach anything, like not trying to give you any kind of lesson, just like this is just a ridiculous thing that happens, like in Dexter's laboratory, in Dexter's lab. And also what's funny is that going back to rewatch these episodes, that the cadences are what like stuck with me, like just the cadence in which Dexter speaks. Of course, he was originally voiced by Christine Cavanaugh, and then when she had retired from the industry, then when the show was like rebooted basically, then Candy Milo took over as Dexter. And I never watched those later seasons of Dexter's Lab, so even when I went back to rewatch it now, I just didn't even bother with those later seasons, sorry to say, because that's when the animation had changed. It was just an entirely different show. So I just remember the first couple of seasons. That's just the show that I grew up with and like what I remember from the series. I don't even think I've seen every episode from the original couple of seasons, but just going back to rewatch a few episodes, and the premise is so simple. It's just this little boy genius and his older sister Dee Dee, who just keeps meddling in his lab. And that's pretty much it. Just like any way that she can destroy things, whether unintentionally or not. And what's funny is that, like, since that is the core dynamic between Dexter and Dee Dee, that to me, though, what stands out is that Dexter isn't as smart as he seems, and Dee Dee isn't as dumb as she seems. So I think that's clever, too. So really, of course, again, like that core relationship of just these two siblings, how they are at odds. But then it's like Dee Dee means well, but also she is, like, super ditzy, and it's like, is she really this dumb? Like, is she really just like, ooh, what does this button do? Or is it more so like she's just doing this to get a rise out of Dexter? Maybe a little bit of both, like when you just want to like annoy your younger brother. It's funny because like she acts like a younger sister, even though she's his older sister. And it's just like, Dexter's so ridiculous now because poor Dexter, like, he's just trying to make his inventions to supposedly save mankind, but really it's more so just, like, kind of to help himself out, more often than not. And then it almost always ends up blowing up in his face, whether by Dee Dee or just, like, his own wrongdoings, too, because, like, his own ego of then ignoring Dee Dee. Like, in the first one I went back to rewatch when, like, he's like, you must help me, Dee Dee, use my time machine, go back into the past. What's funny is, like, I just remember, like, all the cadences of that, if that makes sense. Like, you know what I didn't remember, like, the actual dog, but, like, just like the cadences of it. I was like, oh, I remember this. So weird. And then, like, when she goes back to the past to give him the message that he wrote to himself, and then he ignores her, and the same thing happens. So it's like so dumb, it's like so ridiculous. But it's just like, again, a goofy show. And then with the interstitials of, you got like dial M for monkey, so like the monkey superhero. And then, of course, also the Justice Friends, like, a parody of the Justice League with Infraggable Crunk, as Incredible Hulk, and Major Glory, Captain America, and Val Hallen. Like, it's so ridiculous. And just like a sitcom-y, like these superheroes living together, everyday life. And then also there was, Puppet Pal Clam and Puppet Pal Mitch. Like, the ridiculous stuff in this show is amazing. And then I know, like, later on there was like a TV movie, I remember too, of Dexter, like, older and stuff. And then I remember at one point, I don't know if it was in that movie, but when, like, the parents do learn about the lab, but then he, like, immediately wipes their brains, like, immediately, like, erases their memories, and then they just look each other up and down. It's like, hey, what's going on? And they look each other up and down. Honey, you look great. And they just start kissing. It's, the mom and dad dynamic is so funny, too, because they're just mom and dad, no first names. It doesn't matter their first names. But also, like, that episode when dad just says how, like, he's, like all obsessed with the mom's muffins, and he's just like, he says, kids, like, those muffins are the reason I married your mother. It's like, my God. I know there's that joke, like, trophy, like, dad's trophy on, like, the woman's ass. Like, it's so ridiculous. Like some of kind of, like, the more adult humor that will, like, could be snuck in, like, in these 90s cartoons was so ridiculous. Oh my goodness. I know there was a whole episode that was like banned called Rude Removal, which was like a rude version of Dexter and Dee Dee, like, separating like their rude counterparts, and like then like they have like their nice counterparts. And there is an edit of it online, but like there's actual swearing in it that like seems fake to me. Like they just added in swearing, but I mean, it was funny because it was just like bizarre. But like, so that is online though. I found it on YouTube. So like, I don't know what was up with that, but that was strange. But for me personally, when I went back to watch it, like my favorite episode, and like it still is so amazing to me, this episode, because it's just so ridiculous, is, omelette du fromage. Like, it's just, what a ridiculous premise that he's too busy to study for his French test. So then, like, he just makes that invention to, cram for the French final. And then, like, the thing is skipping the whatever, like, omelette du fromage. And then, like, he wakes up the next day, that's all he can say. And then Dee Dee's teasing him, that's all you can say. And like we just loved omelette du fromage, and we would just quote that endlessly. Like that's all he keeps saying then. And conveniently, that's the one question on the test. Like I've boiled down the curriculum to this one question. So ridiculous. And then he has girls fawning over him because omelette du fromage. And then like he becomes like this world's leader, and like he makes a rap out, like he makes an album. And then like it's so ridiculous. So he has all this fame and glory, and then just at the very end when he can't say, because he like that's all he can keep saying, and then he just can't say his password. So then like the lab self-destructs, so he just loses the lab at the end of that episode. Again, an over-the-top premise, but it's just so funny and ridiculous. And one of those shows where, okay, like the lab disappeared supposedly in that episode, but then it's perfectly fine in the next episode, so like it didn't, like no continuity, it just didn't matter, because as long as it was just ridiculous cartoon hijinks was so funny. Like even certain things where it tried to tell you some kind of lesson, like when he makes himself beautiful and handsome for his class photo, like to take his school picture, and then like his face ends up melting, and first like he like has his handsome face and it's so frightening, and Dee Dee's screaming, and then afterwards when his face melts in like the hot lights from the picture, and then like he has the melted face, and then mom is like, oh Dexter, you closed your eyes, and he's like, oh I learned that it's all about like being yourself and not what you look like, and then Dee Dee just says, well, not if you want to be popular. So like all for the sake of the joke. So funny. Also like that Christmas episode too, where he knows that like he thinks like, oh, Santa is really dad, and mom dresses up as the reindeer, and then like he's trying to like, it's like, oh wow, great costume and everything, and then like it's an actual reindeer, an actual Santa, of course. And then he's like, well, isn't Christmas really about like sharing and giving and love and family? And it's like, no, that's not what it's about. It's like, well, then what's it about? The presents. Like, so stupid with Santa just saying that. I remember us quoting that too. And again, just for the sake of, because it's funny, it's just so ridiculous. I do also really like the one with Dexter shrinking down small, and like he ignores his computer when it says that, like, oh, it'll be like warped reality, because like then like smaller size, so then you're not going to have the perspective, and like he thinks everything is turning real, and then Dee Dee's using him as a doll, like thinking he's a doll, and like playing like the drama with them, like as if it's like a ridiculous soap opera, and like Dee Dee with Darby, and then like when he finally returns to his normal size, it's just so funny though, like with the ghost of his former love, and then like he sees his twin kissing his wife. It's just so ridiculous. And then like when he gets normal size, he accidentally breaks the doll, and then Dee Dee's like, oh, I'm telling mom, and then she's like, oh, it's okay, honey, and then like they walk in, and he's like nursing the doll back to health. He's like, it's okay, my sweet, go back to sleep, you need your rest. Ridiculous. But again, I love it because it's just so insane, so interesting, so quirky, so funny. And another like standout episode then, which I went back to rewatch too, was the episode written by a fan of the series, which that's really amazing that they did that at the time, a 6-year-old fan. And that's so cool, like him narrating it and everything, and that they animated it, and they had to kind of fill in the blanks a little bit with the story, but like with him with Computress. And it's just so funny. And then like he's doing the voices of Dexter, and of course, I didn't even mention his nemesis Mandark with his iconic laugh. Amazing, that laugh, how can you not love that laugh? Ha 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 ha, ridiculous, oh my god. But that kid, like, it's really amazing that they just animated his story, and like, with his whole like story, then like Dexter's like, blows up Mandark's head, whatever. It's just so ridiculous. And then he's like, and you are stupid, like the kid doing the voices. That's amazing. And like the mom in the background, like how they animated that too. I just think that's so cool that they did that. Like that's really amazing that you could say like this kid at the time could be like, oh yeah, I made an episode of Dexter's Laboratory. I think that's just really, really amazing. So the show is just so ridiculous and goofy. Of course, like with Mandark then, as like even within that episode when he's introduced, that he's like, oh, you gotta like get rid of your lab, like how quickly things escalate just for the sake of, because again in 7 minutes, yet how quickly it progresses for the story, and then like all of a sudden he's gonna lose, like shut down his entire lab because of this guy. It's just so ridiculous. But then of course when Mandark falls in love with Dee Dee, so it's just so stupid. I forgot also that Mandark has he has a little sister, Olga, and like there's an episode when Olga and Dee Dee are battling like with their ballet, and it's so funny like when Dee Dee runs up to him in that episode, then like he just breaks his like thing he's working on. It's like, oh, let me just beat her to the punch, and like breaks it, and it's just so ridiculous. Like, also that episode when she is trying to, like, when, like, he makes her smart so that she can be his assistant, and then she's saying, oh, well, if you do this, it's gonna ruin everything. Like, he's not listening, so then he's like, oh, now you're too smart for me. So, and also I always love the episode, like, with the opera, like, at the birth of Dexter, do your breathing, do your breathing, do your breathing. And so stupid. And then, like, when they bring baby Dexter home, and then, like, as he's getting older, and then, like, when she's like, hello, dear brother, what have you got there? Nothing, nothing, you only see air. Don't be silly, I love you very much. I guess I shouldn't touch. Like, how he's, like, stuck with Dee Dee. So, again, like, that ridiculous relationship, but yet it's just, you know, of these two siblings. And it's just, it's so funny, because it's just, like, with his secret lab, it's a great, goofy, ridiculous, funny show that is really fun to rewatch. Like, because goodness, I just had a blast revisiting all these episodes that I loved as a kid. So it's just too funny. I really just breezed through that, but like, that's pretty much all I have to say about this show. That it's just, you know, it's just a fun show to rewatch. And again, those were like mainly my favorite episodes, but you know, like omelette du fromage, you don't get any better than that in my opinion. So it's just too funny. I remember also, like, even the irony sometimes of when Dexter made that invention to slow down time so then he could have enough time to get ready for school, only then to find out, like, at the end of the episode when Dee Dee says, you know, snow day today, so, like, after all that, it was all for nothing. So, you know, poor Dexter, or when he's too young to stay up to watch TV, so then he makes himself older, but then it accidentally goes too old, and then he ends up falling asleep anyway. It's like, oh, he's too old to stay up this late, so again, the irony there. So it's just really silly and over the top, but you know, a lot of fun. It's just it's a really fun show. And get out of my laboratory. And with that, that's going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. Be sure to visit storytellingsaga.com for all places to listen and where to follow on social media. And as always, feel free to send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by emailing me at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next episode, I'm going to be discussing a movie that I absolutely hated as a kid, based on a show that I absolutely love. And that is Hey Arnold the Movie. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to like dig into it. It's going to be, it's going to be a fun one. I'm excited. Until then, thank you for listening. And remember, write what you love.
Enter at your own peril. Past a bolted door where impossible things may happen that the world never seen before.
In Dexter's laboratory lives the smartest boy you've ever seen. But Dee Dee blows his experiments to smithereens. There is gloom and doom while things go boom in Dexter's laboratory.